It's time we talk about another cryptid, the best kind of cryptid, the real cryptid. Maybe the real cryptid was the friends we made along the way. Before we get started, I do want to apologize to anybody viewing from France. First off, you live in France. Second off, I'm going to be butchering every French pronunciation out there. And for those of you that know me, you might be like, oh, well, you grew up in a part of French Canada. Yeah, it's the fun part about being forced to learn something. You tend to throw it out the second that you can. In particular, a language that I didn't even have to use when I lived there. So without further ado, as the French would say, let's get into the Beast of Gévaudan. So like I said, this guy is unlike literally any other cryptid in the fact that it did exist, number one, and number two, we have its body, and number three, it left actual victims in its wake. Now you might hear me say it's the only cryptid that actually has victims, and in retort you might bring up Peter Kane from Peter Kane Dog Training. He's had many experiences with cryptids, and I'm not trying to downplay it. I'm just saying that this is the only one with real evidence. I'm sorry, Peter, if you're watching this. Before we get into any of the victims, we have to go into the first sighting, and the first sighting was in the summer of 1764. Now picture this. Mind's eye open now. You're a young lady tending to her family's cattle. Is your mind open yet? You're in the French countryside. You're out there. Everything is still, calm. It's a beautiful day. You still live in France, but you're getting over it. And suddenly, from the woodline, springs this creature. She described it as being like a wolf, but not wolf-like, if that makes any sense. It springs towards her, but thankfully, you're in a group of cattle, and one of the bulls thinks it's threatening its ladies. And so it stands up for itself, its ladies, its babies, and you, and puts itself between you and this beast. The beast then goes away because now it realizes it's not going to win a one-on-one fight with a bull. That was the first sighting. Now later on that summer, June the 30th, there was a victim. The first victim. At least the first victim that's recorded. You'll understand in just a second. Jeanne Boulet was a young lady who was actually killed by this beast, and her burial certificate states that she was taken by the ferocious beast. It's like I said, we're pretty sure that that's the first victim that this beast claimed, but we're not entirely sure, because if it's just saying the ferocious beast, she might not have been the first one, she just might have been the first one to actually be able to be buried. There was that much left of her. Historians kind of argue on that point. There's a beast in my house. On August 8th of the same year, another victim, a 14-year-old girl this time. And believe it or not, it was about the exact same place that Jeanne Boulet was taken from. The entire French countryside is now completely gripped with fear. You're dealing with a beast that has been sighted numerous times, and now people are actually seeing potentially more than one hanging out together. And it's not just sightings, it's those three victims and several other victims. There are countless victims attributed to this beast. So on New Year's Eve of 1764, the bishop rolls around and is like, hey, this is like divine judgment. We clearly messed up. We need to fast, pray, and do penance. And the Count of Gévaudan actually agrees with him, so they implement this massive penance ritual, essentially. Unfortunately for them, it didn't work. I should say unfortunately for the townspeople, because, the townspeople didn't really have a choice. They were being forced by their local government and their church. So, unfortunately for them, the townspeople, it didn't work. January the 12th of 1765, there was another attack. And it was actually several attacks. Jacques Portefax, once again, I've already apologized. I'm not going to apologize anymore for the pronunciation. And several children from the village of Villeray were actually attacked. Thankfully, none of them lost their lives. Unfortunately, however, on February the 11th of 1765, there was another killing. It was a 12-year-old girl, and she was actually buried on February the 11th of 1765. The attack would have been about a day before. It's incredibly unfortunate because, this is clearly an animal, a wild animal that's running around, and as of right now, people are just attributing it to divine justice. Now, it was after the 7 attacks in one day and the fatality of the 12-year-old girl that everybody in the town, and several towns actually, were all required to travel in large groups. Now, after this actually makes it all the way up to the top, to the royal family. And King Louis actually sends some hunters out there. Now, the first person to actually go and try to take out the Beast of Gévaudan was actually, and I had to look this up, hang on, first Captain Duhamel of the Clermont Prince Dragoons and his troops got sent out to take him out. Now, he got a couple of shots off. However, it is recorded in the history books that the reason he could not take out the Beast of Gévaudan is because his guards were so incompetent, which is utterly hilarious to me. I think that is one of the funniest things ever. I'm just picturing a slapstick, Three Stooges type deal. So he eventually just packed up and left on his own. Now, the next one to actually go after him were the father and son pair. And once again, I got to read out these names. Jean-Charles Marc Antoine Valmarcel de Enval. What? And his son, Jean-Francois. Easy. Why couldn't we just get a first and last name for that guy. They claimed a bunch of Eurasian wolf lives. Believing that the Eurasian wolf was the culprit behind the attacks, they went around with bloodhounds and took out every single one they could find. Incredibly unfortunate. However, the attacks, even more unfortunate, continued. And in June of 1765, a replacement was sent in. Francois Antoine, and he organized what was called the Great Hunt. Now, listen to this, because this is actually my favorite part of the entire story, so if you're not paying attention, I'm going to be really upset with you. Everyone went out to hunt this beast on August the 11th, 1765, and it actually led to one of the greatest encounters in all of French history, and it's called the Maid of Gévaudan. Now get this, there was a young lady who was crossing a bridge and she had a spear because she was part of the hunt. Marie-Jeanne Vallée. She was around 20 years old and she was with a group of individuals while she was crossing the bridge, but about halfway through, she was leading the charge, about halfway through, the beast appears and attacks her on the bridge. Now, when it lunges towards her, she just basically puts her spear down into the ground, and as the beast lunges, it lands on her spear, impaling it. The beast cries out in agony, twists off the spear, and lands down in the small stream that the bridge was over top of. It limps away into the woods, they follow the blood trail, and nothing is found of the beast. Meaning that even though she got a good lick in on it, it got away. Insane. Like I said, I don't know if there's any other story of a cryptid that is that cool. Now, Antoine actually was able to claim one of the beasts of Gévaudan. At the very beginning, I did mention how it seemed that there were two beasts of Gévaudan. This was a rather large gray wolf, and when he brought the body back into town, he got a bunch of people who were victims of the attack, survivors, I should say, of the attacks, to take a look at the body, examine the corpse, and see, hey, was this the guy that was taking you guys out or trying to hunt you guys? And the majority of them all agreed that it was actually this animal that was attacking people. Marie Vallée actually even said, hey, that's where I put the spear. That is definitely the one that attacked me. So everything's good, everyone's happy, everyone's ready to pack up, go home, we got the Beast of Gévaudan. However, if you look down below and you see where the time is at, you'll notice that there's a little bit more time at the end of this video. And it's because they did not get the Beast of Gévaudan. Several more attacks followed, and not only did they follow for a short period of time, they followed for quite a long time. The attacks continued throughout the rest of the year of 1765, and they continued on until 1767. There was an insane amount of lives lost until the 19th of June, 1767. Jean Chastel. This is the guy that is attributed to killing the Beast of Gévaudan. And the reason for that is because the second that this animal hit the ground, the attacks completely stopped in the area. Now, like I said, we have the corpse of this animal, and it is because this guy took the corpse back into town, and he took it to a doctor, Dr. Dr. B, who concluded that it was a record-breaking sized wolf. However, he couldn't tell exactly what was going on with it because by the time that Jean Chastel brought it back to that doctor, the corpse was already so severely degraded that you couldn't really make out exactly what was going on with it. But like I said, its remains still exist. Here's the crazy part. There are stories that this beast had been shot, speared, slashed, bludgeoned with multiple different weapons and still somehow survived all of that until Jean got him. Now here's where the spooky scary part of the video comes in, because according to some local legends, he ended up having to shoot this beast with a large caliber bullet first and foremost. Second off, this large caliber bullet was made of silver, and third off, it was made of silver that was melted down from holy relics, making people believe that this could be some sort of werewolf type deal. Not sure how much I believe that, okay? Because that is just a local legend. It never really made it into any history book or anything like that. But it is cool to talk about. So what ended up happening to the remains? That's the million-dollar question. Because if we had them today, we'd be able to figure out exactly what was going on with that animal. Unfortunately, we're not really too sure where the beast's remains lie. One of the stories is that it was brought back to Versailles as kind of a trophy for the king and all the royals and all that fun stuff. However, as that story goes, Louis, he smelled it and was like, oh, that's really bad, because apparently the taxidermy job was horrendous. All they did was take out the entrails and stuff the whole thing with straw. So anytime it got sufficiently warm enough, it would reek. However, that is called into question with another story from 1809. This story comes from a servant, and I'm just going to read it off if that's cool with you guys. Gilbert finally arrived in Paris, went to stay at the Hotel Particulier of Mr. de la Rochefort, to whom he at the same time gave the letter in which Mr. de Patier begged the Lord to inform the king of the happy deliverance of the monster. The king was at Compiègne at the time, and, according to the news he was told, he gave orders to Mr. de Buffon to visit and examine this animal. This naturalist In spite of the dilapidation to which the worms had reduced it and the fall of all the hairs following the heat of the end of July and the beginning of August, in spite of still the bad odor it gave off, after serious examination, judged that it was only a big wolf. As soon as Mr. de Buffon had made the examination of this animal, Gilbert hastened it to have it buried because of its great stench, and he had been also inconvenienced by it that he was sick and bedridden for more than 15 days in Paris. Okay, buddy, wrap it up. You're being a little bit too much. He suffered from the disease for more than 6 years, and he even attributed to this bad smell that he breathed for so long the poor health he had always been burdened with since that time. All right, buddy, I have assisted in necropsying dead animals before. You're being a little much, okay, dude? So all in all, the beast is buried somewhere near Versailles. Regardless of whether you believe that this was some mystical being or just some large wolf, it is buried around that area. And it kind of gives credence, I guess, if this naturalist attributed being sick to examining a dead animal's remains for more than 6 years of his life, kind of gives credence to a little bit more of a spooky undertone that's going on. All in all, what do I think? I think it was probably just a large wolf that maybe humans encroached a little bit too far into its territory and it started taking people out. There are other stories we can draw from to go to this conclusion. If you look at the top 10 most dangerous single animals on the planet, 9 out of 10 of them are all cats. 8 of those 9 all had something very, very wrong with them. The majority of the tigers, the leopards, the lions, all of those guys usually either were missing their front claws or missing their teeth, their canines, making it almost impossible for them to hunt their actual game, because that actual game can fight back a lot harder than humans naturally can with just our fists, elbows, knees, all that fun stuff. What do you guys think? Was this holy retribution for being French? Was this a natural occurrence that this poor animal ended up having to resort to eating humans? Or do you think it was an animal possessed by a legion of the damned? Let me know down in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.